I was asked a question about using a dummy and helping your child to sleep better. And firstly, I will say that offloading the dummy itself is not always a solution to addressing a sleep challenge, because often the dummy replugs, the multiple dummy replugs that you might be confronted with, are just symptomatic of other adjustments and changes that your sleep profile may benefit from. Firstly, the more rested your child becomes, the less dummy replugs you would need to do, and the more independent you can help your child to become in the context of the dummy, the less you would need to do. So rather than always looking at offloading the soother itself, I would begin to help your baby to begin to use it themselves. So always putting the dummy into their hand and they're guiding their hand to their mouth. And then I often bind that by lots of other changes, by feeding and sleeping balances, promoting a more independent style of sleep, and generally working through a sleep learning exercise. And so then the question arises then for some parents who don't want to continue to use a dummy full stop. So when we have a dummy user, we may always need to do anywhere between 0 to 2 or 3 dummy replugs in the overnight period. And like that, as I've mentioned, the more rested your child becomes, the less you would need to do, and then you can teach them to use it. So if we begin by putting it into their hand, much later on, then I might begin to make their hand look for it, so that you're really sort of encouraging that skill set. And I do that from 4 months onwards. So even though that skill set doesn't properly emerge developmentally until a little bit later on, I'm always kind of stimulating that. And then, of course, if you were still inclined not to use a dummy, what I would normally do at this stage is I would begin my sleep learning exercise. So if I am transitioning from holding or rocking or feeding to sleep and introducing my stay and support approach to help bridge that gap, I might begin with the dummy and have the dummy as a feature to support them in the initial other changes. And then I might give that 5 or 6 days with the dummy, and then I may look at having a bedtime without the dummy and seeing how that is processed by your child. What I always tell parents is that even though you may want to not use a dummy, your baby may have other ideas. And so generally speaking, I think dropping the dummy is very much based on how they respond. So what I would always say is if they are more upset than you can manage or that feels appropriate, then give the dummy back. Continue to teach them to use it and maybe look at that at a later stage. One thing that I will say is that because you have been using a dummy and there is a link to a protective factor around safe sleep and SIDS, I would always get you to have that little conversation with your GP if you're considering to offload it, just so that you are making an informed choice about the implications of having used a dummy and are thinking about not using it going forward. So let me know your own dummy experiences, soother, binky, dummy, and what has helped or what you have found within your own child's sleep profile.